Genesis chapter 47. It's verses 20 through 26. If you'd like to follow along in your pew Bible, it can be found on pages 44 through 45. So Joseph bought all the land in Egypt for Pharaoh. The Egyptians, one and all, sold their fields because the famine was too severe for them. The land became Pharaoh's, and Joseph reduced the people to servitude, from one end of Egypt to the other. However, he did not buy the land of the priests, because they received a regular allotment from Pharaoh and had enough food from the allotment Pharaoh gave them. This is why they did not sell their land. Joseph said to the people, "Now that I have bought you and your land today for Pharaoh, here is seed for you so you can plant the ground. But when the crop comes in, give a fifth of it to Pharaoh. The other 4/5 you may keep, as seed for the fields and as food for yourselves and your households and your children. You have saved our lives," they said. "May we find favor in the eyes of our Lord. We will be in bondage to Pharaoh." So Joseph established it as law concerning land in Egypt, still in force today, that a fifth of the produce belongs to Pharaoh. It was only the land of the priests that did not become Pharaoh's.
The next scripture reading comes from 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 1 through 6. A lot of scripture is kind of built on agrarian livelihoods. People depended upon crops and livestock and all of that for their own living and wages to generate income. So it's very contextual to the scripture. We do it a little bit today and kind of understand that. But the word we're talking about with the sermon is cultivate. So at the root of that is a heart of farming and kind of understanding and nourishing that. It's the reason for a lot of the farming type scriptures that we're reading today with Joseph and Pharaoh, and then today from 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 1 through 6. I'll be reading from the Common English Bible, so if you're following along in the Pew Bible, it might vary slightly from what you follow with me. So chapter 9, verses 1 through 6. It's unnecessary for me to write to you about this service for God's people. I know about your willingness to help. I brag about you to the Macedonians, saying Greece has been ready since last year, and your enthusiasm has motivated most of them. But I'm sending the brothers so that our bragging about you in this case won't be empty words, and so that you can be prepared just as I keep telling them you will be. If some Macedonians should come with me and find out that you aren't ready, we, not to mention you, would be embarrassed as far as this project goes. This is why I thought it was necessary to encourage the brothers to go to you ahead of time and arrange in advance the generous gift you have already promised. I want it to be a real gift from you. I don't want you to feel like you are being forced to give anything. What I mean is this: the one who sows a small number of seeds will also reap a small crop. And the one who sows a generous amount of seeds will also reap a generous crop. And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So this week we're diving into the third C of Mr. Bill Search's book, Simple Small Groups, and that being, of course, cultivate. I've always loved and appreciated this word. Maybe it's because my father's a horticulturalist, which is just a fancy scientific word for meaning he plays with plants all day. But he enjoys that, and I've also kind of developed a love for that as well. But there's some very typical application that we can apply to our lives with this farming terminology that we can use in our own lives. So when the ground and soil gets prepared and ready for gardening, that part is called cultivating. So how we can do that is through a bunch of various means, and we'll kind of talk about those in an extent today, so you understand how we can cultivate and what it means other than just digging holes and putting seeds in the ground. So what Mr. Search is saying is that we are called as Christians to cultivate in this world and in this life, and as a church as a whole and as individuals. We're called to just cultivate. So we start with the primary question: what does it really mean to cultivate? Well, it's a kind of a fun word to say, but at its heart, how does it apply to us, and what can it do for us, or how do we come to know it? Well, according to Mr. Search, it's very simple. He says, cultivating missional lives means that we serve others and we share our faith. It means that we demonstrate through our lives acts of service and love for Jesus and other people. Sometimes cultivating is when we use our spiritual gifts to build up believers. Sometimes cultivating is when we simply take care of the physical needs of a person going through a hardship in life. It comes alive when a group helps each member look outside of their community for those who need God's love. So groups that are good at cultivating often live outside of their comfort zone. So to me, that's kind of the key. Groups and people that cultivate exceptionally well get outside of their comfort zone. Well, I get it. Comfort zones are safe and nice and comfortable, right? We like them. We don't like to change. I have my habits. I have my routines. I have my things that make me feel nice and safe. So I don't want to get out of that. I don't want to approach somebody. I don't want to start a new venture in life or a new job or any of these other new activities because I feel nice and safe, right? But Bill Search is affirming that if we want to get really good at cultivating, we have to challenge ourselves and push ourselves outside of these comfort zones. When it comes to truly connecting and changing, we need to look to those areas that help us find moments and opportunities for cultivation in life. You see, when I look back at my own life, I point towards the moments in which I kind of felt a little uncomfortable or felt I was pushed outside of my comfort zone. And yeah, it was challenging and it was hard at the time. But I look back and those were the moments in which I probably grew the most as a person. They helped shape me and guide me and help me become the person that I am today, which is not perfect, but it's much better than the kid I knew in high school or college, right? Kind of just grow and change along the way because I was willing to go outside of my comfort zone. I know it's not always easy and it's not always pleasant, but I've invited others to partake in that, and I have grown immensely for them as well. A small example of this is what other pastors, or maybe other people will kind of do too. We call them barbershop confessions, right? You guys are probably familiar with those. You go to a hairstylist, if you're not getting it cut by your mother or your father or brother or sister, you go to a professional, you sit down in the chair, and they put that tarp or drape around you, and I still manage to get hairs in my shirt somehow. I don't know how that works. All this technology, and we can't keep hairs out of my collar. But you get sitting in that chair, you get prepared and ready, and then they start conversations with you, right? We know how it goes. And I always kind of fear these to some degree because I worry about the inevitable question that they're going to ask. What do you do for a living? Oh, well, do you really want to know? I get a little apprehensive, especially if they've been saying things they think a pastor typically shouldn't hear, right? Like their great party they had for 3 days where they didn't wake up for 4 days after that, or their favorite swear word of the week, or their favorite crime they're going to commit next week. But no, I've never really heard that one. I'm still waiting. But you know how those conversations can go. So after they get to that question, what do you do for a living? I'll say, oh, I'm a pastor. And at that point, it can go either one of two ways I've found. Either one way, they're completely silent for the rest of my haircut and don't say anything, or they just won't stop talking my ear off, and I can't get a word in either way, right? So I don't know why I'm sometimes hesitant to tell them what I do, but I just am. It's my comfort zone. I know me, and I stick to that. So I struggle with my response. Do I tack on something to the end of, I'm a pastor? And then say, but don't worry, I'm not going to judge you. Still feel free to cut my hair how you would like to do it. Or do I tell them how much my faith has impacted my life and how much I've grown with Christ in my life? Or do I speak out against unhealthy habits or practices or addictions they might share with me? Or do I quickly change the subject and say, oh, the weather's great today, isn't it? See, I am a pastor and I struggle with this cultivation sometimes. I'm worried about how people might react or how they might respond to something. But how can I feel so perplexed in sharing that? I don't get it sometimes. And so I figure if I struggle with this response as a pastor, where following and devoting myself to Christ is essentially my life. And I can only imagine how challenging it can be for other people. Yet the times in which I've said and confidently said, I am a pastor, I've witnessed neat moments for cultivation. I feel less overwhelmed and intimidated if I think of it in the sense that I'm just planting a seed. I'm not the one that has to come back tomorrow and water that seed. I don't have to spray insecticide. I don't have to cover it if it's going to freeze that night. All I'm doing is planting a simple seed. It's a lot less intimidating when you think of it that way, right? We don't have to convert someone. We're not here to make someone Jesus Christ's 13th beloved disciple. We just need to plant a seed. I plant a seed of faith, of love, of kindness. There are many different ways we can cultivate this world and other people. So to me, that takes a lot of pressure off of us. If all we're thinking and all we're imagining is that we're just planting a seed of faith and love and hope in that person. I feel there are a couple of reasons we might be a little hesitant to cultivate or share our faith freely with other people. And maybe our hearts have been calloused or hurt along the way. You guys know what I'm talking about. We shared our faith with someone and they rejected us or ignored us, or we get that strange and funny look saying, "What are you talking about?" Or maybe we tried too many times to open up to someone else only to be hurt or scared for sharing our faith. But what about it inhibits us from wanting to share it freely with other people? Are we embarrassed by it? Do we lack confidence in answering questions that may be asked of us if we engage in that conversation? Do we not feel that we could respond appropriately in certain scenarios or situations, or people might be judging us for knowing who we are and who we admit to following? But these are all hypotheticals. And it's not as scary as it really sounds. And we can't live in a world of hypotheticals all the time. Sometimes we just have to live and dig and plant that seed. And somehow, someway, we've got to whittle down our calloused or hurt heart. We've got to drop the walls of apprehension so that we can see and feel the need of other people and approach them with an open heart and an open mind. Furthermore, it's essential that we look outside of our tight-knit groups, right? We all have those support groups that we trust and know and love, but we've got to cultivate outside of that. So whether it's outside of the church or a small group or Sunday school group or a meeting or Cub Scouts or whoever, look outside of that to find those moments of cultivation in life. So a perfect example of this is through the Scouts, right? Now, if you eventually go and stay long enough in the Scouts, you'll reach the rank of Eagle Scout, right? I only made it to Weeblos. I guess I wasn't good enough and I got kicked out or something. I'm not sure. I think my mother moved, so I stopped going, but I loved it when I was able to go. But when you reach when you're up for Eagle Scout, you have to do a community project, right? Now, being a pastor, I've worked a lot with the Scouts over the years and done a number of community projects for this. So this is a perfect example of looking outside their group. They look for the community to make the community a better place as a prerequisite for becoming an Eagle Scout. So at my previous church, the Eagle Scout project was putting some nice landscaping around the church and making and growing and cultivating a garden, which was very nice, and that turned out beautifully. Even here at TPC a few years ago, an Eagle Scout made a nice little stand with a TV on it so we could advertise and move that around and have classrooms and do various things with that, so we appreciate that. So if you see the little wheeling thing around, be sure to thank a Scout for that and that contribution. So this is an example of looking outside our group for cultivating and planting seeds. Even with the preschool, they are able to manage and work their magic to share that love and just even plant a seed through chapel each and every Wednesday or through the love that they show the families and the children that come through those doors. Again, it's just planting a seed. So one of the greatest methods to cultivation through this outward focus and sharing our faith and is doing that with people that we don't know, right? So I had a mentor in seminary. He taught me a lot, and one of the things he liked to share was what he called an elevator of faith, which means if you get on an elevator, you can share your faith with someone in that a short little time span, and then you can plant that seed of cultivation, right? So I said, well, I just like to get on there and play with the buttons. But he is very adamant about sharing his faith. So he said his elevator faith he could sum up in 4 sentences. So I'll tell you what his were. He said, God created the world and it was good. And then he said, sin entered the world through Adam and Eve, and then wickedness and corruption kind of befell it. And then God sent his only son to restore that wickedness and overcome that sin. And then Christ died on the cross so that God conquered sin and death so that we may have eternal life. That was his faith summed up into 4 sentences that he could share with a barber, someone on an elevator, or a stranger at a restaurant, whoever. And I was in an elevator when he did this. And me being the person that I am, I was like, well, what is going on here? But he just felt comfortable cultivating in that fashion. I know that's more challenging for some people, but that's a way we can just plant a seed. Now, don't worry about how it's going to be received. Don't worry about what that person might think the next day. You may never see them again, or maybe you'll see them in 10 years. You never know. But if all we're called to is cultivate, then that's really not that hard. Just planting that little seed. So ultimately, I like a couple primary concepts when it comes to cultivation that Mr. Search encourages. One is that the term itself is hopeful. It's a process term and not an end. See, when you cultivate something, you might not know what grows, but there's hope at the end of that. Maybe instead of planting a pear tree, you get oranges, and you're okay with those oranges, right? Where you cultivate and don't worry about the growing process, just worry about the planting and cultivating process. So secondly is the notion that cultivating missional lives is not an event, but it's a way of life. So we should encourage one another to keep an open ear and eye to watch for the ways to serve and to testify for Christ's work in our home, in our neighborhood, and in our school. So that's just it. It's not a little box we just check and say, oh, I shared my elevator faith today, or I was cultivating today for 5 minutes, so I'm good to go. It's a way of life that we live, and we show, and we reflect through things that we do in our homes, in our neighborhoods, in our schools, in our programs, in our committees, in our groups. So just think about this. All of you guys are here today for a reason. You weren't born with that seed to automatically go to church. Most of you probably didn't enter into this world as a toddler and tell your mom, I want to go to church, right? Someone had to plant that seed in you to get you to where you are today. Whether it's in this church or another church or through some group or some program or some small group that you might belong to in life. Someone took their time and their effort to plant that seed. So it only seems fair that we should return the favor. Planting little seeds wherever we go. Because you never know what someone might grow into.